Joan's memory will remain for a very long time. The qualities of human courage, fortitude, endurance, that is really what's made her reputation.
The most famous girl in history was just proven to be a total mystery by a bunch of scientists in white coats. Everyone is obsessed with the idea that Joan of Arc was a miracle, but the truth is actually more shocking than a ghost story. Historians spent years making fun of her story, calling it impossible.
It's very unlikely to get preserved DNA out of bone that has been cremated.
Then they looked at her DNA. I am not gonna lie, what they found is going to leave you staring at the screen. This key detail can shock even the biggest history buffs. This is the real Joan, and she is finally talking. Lab results that changed French history. For over 6 centuries, Joan of Arc has been a person stuck between a ghost story and a history book. She was a peasant girl who said she heard angels, led French armies to wins that should not have happened, and met her end at the stake at only 19 years old. Thousands of books and movies have tried to figure her out, but the story always felt like it was missing something. Even though she suffered a dark end for her fight, her memory just will not go away. Today, people want to know who she really was. Things get even crazier because new DNA tests are forcing the experts to rethink every single thing they thought they knew. It turns out that she is actually one of the most documented women from her time. Born around 1412 in the tiny village of Domremy, she lived on a dangerous border. She did not leave behind any letters written by her own hand, no diary, and no book about her life. But weirdly enough, we have something way better. We have thousands of lines of her spoken words. These were written down by people who were actually trying to get her in trouble. These records from her trial in 1431 give us a view into her mind that we do not have for anyone else from that time. The main trial was run by a bishop named Pierre Cochon. He was working for the English and wanted to make her look like a liar. He brought in the smartest church lawyers and teachers in the country. Every question they asked was a trap. They wanted her to say something wrong so they could say she was a fake. But the way she answered was one of a kind. What most people do not realize is that this 19-year-old girl was actually smarter than the men trying to trick her. One of the most famous moments was when they asked if she knew she had the favor of the heavens. This was a giant trap. If she said yes, she was being too proud. If she said no, she was admitting she was a fake. She looked them in the eye and said if she did not have it, she hoped she would get it, and if she did, she hoped she would keep it. This answer is famous because it dodged the trap perfectly. She had never been to school, but she had a natural calmness that the experts could not break. She also knew a lot about how the law worked. She kept telling the court they did not have the right to judge her. She asked for a lawyer and complained about being kept in a prison with soldiers watching her. These were not the kinds of things a simple farm girl was supposed to know. Some people thought she must have been secretly trained, but the records show she was just that sharp. Basically, the very people trying to destroy her ended up saving her voice for us to read today. She never lost her cool. Even when they pushed her to say her visions were fake, she stayed solid. She described seeing 3 specific saints and never changed her story. Because the scribes were so careful, we know exactly what happened every day of the trial. We know the names of the judges and even how the room felt. This much detail is rare. We do not even have this much information on most kings from that time. Her journey ended in the marketplace in Rouen on May 30th, 1431. They thought they were silencing her, but they were actually making her immortal. But this brings up a massive question about what happened next. The thing is, even though they tried to erase her, parts of her story started showing up in the most unexpected places hundreds of years later. Dark secret of the bottle of Chignon. The stories from that day say her body was burned 3 times. They wanted to make sure there was nothing left for people to collect. They even threw her ashes into the River Seine so no one could start a cult. But even with all those rules, things started popping up in the 1800s. People wanted a piece of her so badly that suddenly real parts of her started to appear in shops and churches. The most famous of these was found in 1867. A man who studied old things claimed he found a jar in an old medicine shop. It was called the bottle of Chignon. Inside this glass jar was a black piece of a rib, some charred cloth, and a cat bone. Everyone said these were the things saved from the fire where she met her end. For a long time, people really believed it. This jar was shown to everyone as a holy object. I am not going to lie, people were so obsessed with the legend that they did not even think to check if it was real. But then modern science stepped in. In the early 2000s, a team of bone doctors led by Philippe Charlier got permission to test the jar. They used every tool they had, from special microscopes to carbon dating. What they found was a total shock to the system. The bone in the jar did not look like it had been in a hot fire. When bone burns at a high heat, it cracks in a very specific way. This bone did not have those marks. Instead, it was covered in something that looked like tar and tree sap. When they ran the chemical tests, they found stuff like pine resin and myrrh. These are not things you find at a stake in the Middle Ages. These are things you find in ancient Egypt. So here is the deal. The bone of a saint was actually a piece of a mummy that was thousands of years old. They also looked at that cat bone. Stories said a cat was thrown into the fire with her because people back then were superstitious. But the cat bone in the jar was not burned either. It had been treated the same way as the human bone. The whole thing was a giant fake. It looks like someone in the 1800s took apart an old mummy and put it in a jar to make money. It was a fake story made to fit what people wanted to believe. This discovery was a huge blow to people who wanted a physical connection to her, but it also showed how much people loved her. They wanted her to be real so badly that they were willing to believe a piece of a mummy was her rib. Hands down, this shows that the myth of Joan of Arc was growing faster than the actual facts. But if the bones were fake, what about the girl herself? To find the real Joan, scientists had to stop looking in jars and start looking at the ground where she grew up. What they found in the dirt of her home village tells a much tougher story than any legend ever could. Real world of a teenage soldier. Joan of Arc was born into a world of non-stop violence. Her village, Domremy, was right on the edge of a war zone. By the time she was born in 1412, the area had been fighting for almost 80 years. People were used to raids, hunger, and having to run for their lives. When we look at the ground today, we can see how the villages were built to survive. They had walls, ditches, and secret places to hide. Everyone's obsessed with her visions, but they forget that she was a survivor long before she ever saw a saint. The records show that just a few months before she left home, her village was actually burned down. She and her family had to run away to a nearby town to stay safe. This happened all the time. Imagine growing up in a place where you always had to be ready to leave everything behind. This was not a quiet life on a farm. It was a life of constant fear and being tough. When scientists look at the bones of people from that time and place, they see a lot of wear and tear. These people worked incredibly hard from the time they were children. Their bones show marks where big muscles were pulling on them. They had bad backs and sore knees before they were even 20. This key detail can shock people who think of her as a fragile girl because her body was actually built for war. She spent her days carrying heavy water buckets, chopping wood, and working in the fields. This gave her the strength she needed to wear heavy armor for days at a time. Contemporaries said she could stay on a horse longer than most men. That kind of toughness does not just happen by magic. It was built into her through years of brutal labor. They also did not eat very well back then. Most of the time, they just had beans and bread. Sometimes they went hungry for weeks, but this made them resilient. They could handle being out in the cold and the rain without getting sick. The thing is, Joan was a product of her environment, and that environment was a training ground for a soldier. Even the way she talked about the world showed this. She was not some dreamer who did not know what war was. She told her judges that she had seen soldiers and knew what they did. She grew up in a place where every man had to keep a weapon to defend his house. The line between a normal person and a fighter was very thin. This brings us to the biggest mystery of all. How did a girl from a tiny, burned-out village end up leading the entire army of France? Historians have argued about this for centuries, but new looks at her military moves show that she was not just lucky. Hidden science of her battlefield wins. When you look at the actual battles, you see that Joan was a total power booster for the French army. When she showed up at the siege of Orleans in April of 1429, the French were losing badly. They were scared and did not want to fight. They were just sitting there waiting to lose. Joan changed the energy immediately. She did not want to sit around and wait. She wanted to move fast and hit hard. It has been missing for years in the history books, but her actual strategy was based on speed and aggression. She pushed the commanders to stop playing it safe. Within just a few days, she led attacks on the English forts. She was right there in the front carrying her big banner. This banner was a huge deal. It had Jesus Maria written on it, and it helped all the soldiers stay together. It made them feel like they could not lose. Experts now say that her biggest strength was her ability to make a discouraged army believe they were unbeatable. She also had a great eye for the battlefield. At a place called Jargeau, she led a charge right under heavy fire. She even got hit by a stone in the head but got right back up. This kind of bravery made the soldiers love her. They would follow her anywhere. For starters, she was not just a symbol. She was a leader who understood that the first side to stop being afraid usually wins. Experienced generals who had been fighting for 20 years were shocked by her. They wanted to go slow, but she knew that momentum was everything. After she won at Orleans, she kept the pressure on. She won a string of battles in the Loire Valley that finally broke the English hold on the country. It was a ticking clock, and she was moving faster than anyone else. Some people said it was magic, but military experts today say it was just great leadership. She knew how to use her image to scare the enemy and fire up her own side. The English were actually terrified of her. They thought she was a witch, and that fear made them make mistakes. What most people do not realize is that she was playing a mental game as much as a physical one. Even when she was captured, she did not stop being a leader. She tried to escape several times, even jumping out of a high tower. She never gave up. Her story is not just about hearing voices, it is about a girl who used everything she had to change the world. Is it possible that we are still underestimating the real power of Joan of Arc today? What do you think her DNA would tell us about her true strength? Drop a comment below, like this video, and subscribe for more mysteries.